The credit for my work costs $5,500. I'm going to be very vague to not bog this down with jargon. I work in a fairly prestigious biology lab on the East Coast where we study various pathogens. And for one project, I was trying to isolate a certain bacteria from samples containing a wide array of species in order to infect mice with the strain under various conditions, while doing research to see if there were mediums that were selective for the target bacteria or if there were antibiotics that my target was resistant against that would kill everything else. I ended up with various ways to isolate the bacteria, using a process I thought of myself to test the efficacy of each isolation method. Before starting my experiment, I ran it by my coworker who is a seasoned immunologist of 10 years. Let's call him Dan, who trained me in working with bacteria when I started the job. I'll probably rant about Dan in another post. He thinks it's great and gives it the green light. And for the next 2 months, I'm running the experiments, calling biotech, pharma companies for quotes on their products that I'm using to isolate the bacteria, and end up with a big spreadsheet that contained both the efficacy and cost-benefit analyses of all the methods I came up with or found. I show my results to Dan and he's ecstatic, although he mentions that it's likely going to be a while before we use the data and make a decision on the isolation method due to us waiting on samples to come in. I send the spreadsheet along to my head scientist at a lab anyway and shift my time to other projects I'm working on. Another couple months go by and after not hearing anything from Dan about patient samples, another coworker comes up to me and asks me where I could find a set of certain plates to isolate the target bacteria from. I'm confused and ask him why he's looking for those, because based on my experiments, the plates he wanted were the least efficient and most expensive way to select the bacteria we were looking for. Not to mention that I had no idea that we had ordered any more than the 10 plates I used to run my experiment. He argued me and said that Dan's research said otherwise. That confused me even more, and when I asked him to show me what he was talking about, he proceeded to show me my own spreadsheet, where he quickly realized that he had been misled and said that Dan must have made an error in the spreadsheet. I told him that I was the one who ran the experiments and got the results, and if Dan ordered the bad plates, then he had just wasted the lab's money. The other coworker said I probably told Dan to order the wrong plates. But when I said I had no idea plates were being ordered at all he had to say to that was, "Oh, that's weird." Sure enough, later that day I look inside our cold room and see several boxes, roughly $5,500 worth, of the expensive and inefficient plates. And I confront Dan about it. I asked Dan why he ordered so many plates, and if he had been telling other people that he had done the experiments. He laughs a little before asking if I had even read the spreadsheet that I made, and states that the plates he ordered were the best based on my criteria, and that because he taught me how to work with bacteria, I was piggybacking his methods, and that him validating my experiment before running it was tantamount to him doing the work. He told me not to worry about it anymore and that he would be presenting the data to the PI because he had already prepared a slideshow and everything for it. I wanted to open up the spreadsheet and tell him that he had just wasted a lot of money, but he was so condescending and sure of himself about having ownership of my work that all I said was, "Okay," before returning to my bench. Later that week, we have our lab meeting where Dan is presenting his work to the whole lab and states that we can finally move ahead with isolating the target bacteria from patient samples. Sure enough, my spreadsheet is on the TV used as our projector, and my PI asks when we could expect the materials used in the most efficient isolation method to arrive. Dan corrects the PI, stating that the bad plates were the best and very proudly stated that the plates had already arrived. I then interjected, very bluntly saying that the plates he ordered would recover over 90% less of the bacteria than the method my pie had picked from the spreadsheet. Dan fell silent, face going shades of red before he stumbled through a justification of ordering the bad plates. How in the long run we'd save some money by not ordering the materials needed to do the method my pie wanted, only for my pie to chime in stating it was absolutely worth it if it meant a tenfold increase in recovery, and that we shouldn't be wasting samples, time, and money on bad plates. Dan very quickly blurted out that it was my spreadsheet and that there must have been a miscommunication between us before ordering the plates before he quickly sat down. And all I said was that I was not told by anyone that anything off my spreadsheet was being ordered. My pie asked Dan if he submitted the data to me before I sent it to him. And Dan sheepishly admitted that I was the one who ran the experiments and compiled everything. So he must have misread my data and ordered the wrong materials, and was about to suggest that I possibly misspoke when showing him my data the first time before my pie cut him off to move on to the next lab topic. The rest of the meeting he was red, glaring at me out of the corner of his eye. After the lab meeting, Dan pulled me aside and asked me why I didn't tell him that he ordered the bad plates. I told him that since it was his research he should have known what method gave the best results, since he would have calculated the yield of each method when doing the experiments, and that if he wanted my input he should have told me before he ordered them. I went to the pie and cleared up the confusion, putting in the right order for the materials needed to best isolate the target bacteria from our samples and making sure he knew that I had no idea that my data was being acted upon in case Dan went behind my back to somehow throw me under the bus. Needless to say, we communicated far less after that whole ordeal and I quickly found other people in the lab to work with. I later found out that he had been taking credit for all the work I did ever since starting in the lab. And while it frustrates me to still have to tell people every now and then that I made the figures, or did the experiments that Dan had told them about when my data comes up, more people have come to me to discuss their projects and ask for my help since Dan was exposed. And I find solace in the memory of his red, twisted face looking like it was going to explode in front of everyone, barely able to make out a word to cover his ass. Edit. TL. Doctor read the whole thing. Ordering expensive stuff that turns out to not work? Happens in the biolab all the time. A postdoc that claims data to be his? Not so much. Huge red flag to me. I'd skip him when your data come in and discuss them with the pie only. Don't trust Dan and hope his funds end before yours. Up. Why didn't you warn me that I stole your work incorrectly? Quote, thank God Op is getting their duly earned credit now. Dan the douche. Dan can't fill his plate and eat it too. I was working in a DNA profiling lab once and we had a massive number of samples come in that needed to be processed as soon as possible. I suggested a couple of things to get them processed more efficiently and she seemed impressed. She picked up the phone and, while I was still in the room, called the manager saying, I've been thinking about these samples and I think we should. It was an important moment that stuck with me when I was managing a team later on in my career. There are always layers of credit in labs, and it depends on the audience. In internal lab discussions, you always give credit where it's due. Besides it being the right thing to do, it's easy to look foolish if you don't. People talk and you should always look out for your own. Externally is where things get murky. The more removed the audience is from your lab group, the more means the team. If you lead a team, it's generally understood that you aren't the one doing all, or even some of the work, although it is understood that you're providing technical leadership. I've seen funding agencies take full credit for work they're paying contractors to do. But again, it's understood they're cutting the checks. Although who is providing the technical leadership can get murky. OMG. That sucks. I had a similar situation when I started as a defense contract auditor. I worked for like a year with this dude on some very large assignments. I kept turning in work, and at the end of my first year, my supervisor told me he couldn't finish my assessment because I had never in a full year turned in an assignment. Like none. I was gobsmacked. I went over all my assignments with my supervisor, and it turns out that dude was stealing all my work, and then putting his name on it. Not just mine, but every other new auditor that could do decent work. Nothing really happened because it's a federal job, but they did silo him off on very specific assignments after that and kept him away from new people. I warned new folks about him, and nobody talked to him in the office after that. Common occurrence, no doubt. Did he get fired for stealing your work repeatedly? This is really bad. If this were a patentable idea and the patent went in with Dan's name OR without your name on it, the patent is invalid. And this might be a patentable idea. Process patents are a thing. I worked for a small tech company in the early 2000s. My immediate supervisor sends out email to our team asking for input changes to our company website. Based on any customer feedback, I made 3 suggestions and send them to this supervisor. A week later I am riding in an elevator with company president who said, "Duty born. I am disappointed that you never submitted in suggestions or changes to our website. I was sure your creative brain would have come up with something." Turns out supervisor took my suggestions and claimed them as her own, giving me 0 credit. Yeah, got my ass out of that company. Hoisted on his own petard. I would tell Dan where to stick his plates. People stealing your work is far too common in academia, and the field doesn't pay well anyway. Shit gig. That was super interesting. Thanks for sharing. I have to respect that TL drive. Maybe I'm just jaded, but this sounds like a very female experience. Dan should have known better than to eat off the wrong plates. This is normal lab pecking order, sadly. You still work with him?
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epicaricast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.